Good day, everyone. It is Miss T, and we are going to begin The Giver. So, this is just the introduction. The Giver by Lois Lowry, and this is the introduction. 20 years. No kidding. 20 years? It's hard to believe. 20 years ago, I was much younger. My parents were still alive. Two of my grandchildren had not yet been born, and another one, now in college, was an infant. 20 years ago, I didn't own a cell phone. I didn't know what quinoa was, and I doubt I had ever tasted kale. There had recently been a war. Now we refer to that one as the First Gulf War, but back then, mercifully, we didn't know there would be another. Maybe a lot of us weren't even thinking about the future then, but I was, and I'm a writer. I wrote The Giver on a big machine that had recently taken the place of my much loved typewriter, and after I printed the pages very noisily, I had to tear them apart one by one at the perforated edges. When I refer to this as my computer, someone more knowledgeable pointed out that my machine was not a computer. It was a dedicated word processor. Oh, okay then, I said, as if I understood the difference. As I carefully separated these 200 or so pages, I glanced again at the words I had typed on them. I could see that I had written a complete book. It had all the elements of the 17 or so books I had written before. The same things: students of writing list on school quizzes, characters, plot, setting, tension, climax, though I didn't reply as he had hoped to a student who emailed me some years later with the request, please list all the similes and metaphors in The Giver. I'm sure it contained those as well. I had typed the end after the intentionally ambiguous final paragraphs. But I was aware that this book was different from the many I had already written. My editor, when I gave him the manuscript, realized the same thing. If I had drawn a cartoon of him reading those pages, it would have had a text balloon over his head. The text would have said simply, "Go." But nothing prepared me for the reader's reactions. I had always received lots of letters from kids, frequently writing as a class assignment. One began, "This is a friendly letter." Over the years, of course, they have more often become emails. But that didn't compare to the mail about The Giver. First of all, for the volume, the sheer number of them, even now, 20 years later, they still come sometimes, 50 to 60 in a day. But now the letter writers were different. Sure, many of them were still kids, but a startling number were much older. And the content was no longer the school assignment letter, the obligatory, "I thought this was a pretty good book." Instead, the letters were passionate. "This book changed my life." Occasionally angry. "Jesus would be ashamed of you," one woman wrote, and sometimes startlingly personal. One couple wrote to me about their autistic, selectively mute teenager who had recently spoken to them for the first time about The Giver, urging them to read it. A teacher from South Carolina wrote that the most disruptive, difficult student in her eighth grade class had called her at home on a no-school day and begged her to read him the next chapter over the phone. A night watchman in an oil refinery wrote that he had happened on the book. It was lying on someone's desk while making his rounds. I'm not a reader, he wrote me, but man, I'm glad I came to work tonight. A Trappist monk wrote to me and said he considered the book a sacred text. A man who had, as an adult, fled the cult in which he had been raised told me that his psychiatrist had recommended The Giver to him. Countless new parents have written to explain why their babies have been named Gabriel. A teacher in rural China sent me a photograph of beaming students holding up their copies of the book. The FBI took an interest in the 200-page, vaguely threatening letter sent by a man who insisted that he was actually the giver and advised me not to go near the city where he lived. A teenager wrote that she had been considering suicide until she read The Giver. One young man wrote a proposal of marriage to his girlfriend inside the book and gave it to her. She said yes. But a woman told me in a letter that I was clearly a disturbed person and she hoped I would get some help. Somehow, this book and what it has to say has touched a lot of people from all walks of life and from many cultures, since over the years it has been translated into countless languages from Czech to Hungarian to Thai. Recently, I've reluctantly turned down invitations to speak about The Giver in Kyrgyzstan and Korea, and where I am told readers are just as affected by it as they are in Toledo and Tucson. A stage adaptation of The Giver has been performed in cities and towns across the USA for years. More recently, an opera has been composed and performed, and soon there will be a film. Does The Giver have the same effect when it is presented in a different way? It's hard to know. A book, to me, is almost sacrosanct, such an individual and private thing. The reader brings his or her own history and beliefs and concerns and reads in solitude, creating each scene from his own imagination as he does. There is no fellow ticket holder in the next seat. The important thing is that another medium, stage, film, music, doesn't obliterate a book. The movie is here now on a big screen with stars and costumes and a score, but the book hasn't gone away. It has simply grown up, grown larger, and begun to glisten in a new way. That is from Lois Lowry, the author of this book, The Giver. And I think at this point, for this book, you all know the blessing, so I will not recite it. But may God's blessing be upon you. That's all for today.